Okay, well, thanks everybody so much again for being here today to do this webinar about the Relevancy Roadmap project with the Ohio Division of Wildlife. This is Lindsay Martinez speaking to you. I work with the Wildlife Management Institute to manage the online conservation relevancy community. And that's a space I hope all of you have already joined, and it's a place to serve as a community of practice for those who are working with the Relevancy Roadmap and working to enhance conservation through broader engagement. So we're very glad to be doing this event today with Mr. Peter Novotny, who is the Assistant Chief for the Division of Wildlife at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And today he's going to be speaking about the project that Ohio's been doing the last few years to work on the Relevancy Roadmap in partnership with Wildlife Management Institute, Responsive Management, and Innovative Outcomes as well. So it's a great partnership. Lots of work's been done the last few years, and we're very excited to hear about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hey, before we start, so you're in this realm. How do you define relevancy?
Great question. Thanks for asking me a question to get started. And I think that relevancy is all about reaching out to folks from the community to make sure that they feel that the work that these conservation agencies are doing matters to them. And for folks, if the wildlife conservation work matters to them, they can support the agency through, their political support, their financial support, their time, to volunteer, and that can really help, enhance conservation outcomes for our fish and wildlife. So we're really glad to have folks like you working on this. Thank you.
That's a great perspective.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, so Ohio has kind of started this step like all the states. What is relevancy and what does that mean? And I appreciate everybody taking the time to hear kind of a hopefully a short story on how we kind of stepped through this and why we did it. We're one of the oldest state agencies in Ohio. We're going to be celebrating our 150th year. And with that comes great storytelling of our history, but it really comes along with some really strong institutional themes. And part of what we had seen as any administration coming in, Chief Kendra Wecker and came into her role 4 years ago and challenged her leadership team to really come up critically thinking about positioning the Division of Wildlife for the future. As we were talking about that, then in the background was this relevancy roadmap and the preparation for being released to all the states. And we wanted to be prepared for when that document did come online of how to best be positioned to implement some of the changes. So, how we kind of started out was a conscious effort for us to come up with some pilot projects that we were going to send down to the staff to empower the staff with a budget and with gathering a team. And the project that we came up with was to take a critical look at our wildlife areas and see who's using these areas and how people interact with these, with us, with this idea of access. And so we had created a small working group to look at 4 wildlife areas here in Ohio and to put into action some ideas of are these areas welcoming? Are these areas, how does that tradition side of what a wildlife area means, which typically would mean trapping, hunting, and fishing and wildlife recreation, can we enhance that? Can we enhance the area? And so they came up with these great ideas. And wildlife agencies are a bunch of doers. We had to get staff doing something so they could be tied into this idea. And so we gave them a small budget, and they came up with different types of signage to be more welcoming and different enhancing our parking areas and kiosks and things that we typically would not have done. But that was our first step into it. And then the roadmap came out and we identified there was areas that we can really implement at the time. The way we're structured is on positioning us for the future. We have what's called an executive planning group, which is about 14 of our senior administrators that are really set aside for finding time to position ourselves planning wise and to have really tough discussions. And so we started, with this pilot project, which caused us to really have some engagement with ourselves on making the commitment that we were going to implement the relevancy roadmap.
Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking a little bit about how you all got started with that. And I think for a lot of state agencies that are thinking about how to begin sort of their journey with the relevancy roadmap, it's interesting to hear where others started. I was hoping you could also speak a little bit to some of the historic challenges that Ohio has faced in regards to relevancy with your constituents.
Yes, Lindsay, it was interesting. So we know the strong traditional way of doing business, and to our staff that has grown up, the neat thing about most wildlife agencies, the day they start, people will retire 32 years later. I think that kind of transcends just Ohio. And it's a great place to work, and we're successful. I mean, we have all these success stories of bald eagles and deer and turkey and all these items where wildlife conservation will benefit future generations. What that causes is there's a reinforcement of the current way we're doing business. And the staff was asking, why would we change if, look at all the success stories and look at all the traditional way we have relied on our traditional partners. The fear of abandoning those traditional relationships, that was really strong. And that's a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge. One of the ways we kind of stepped through or recognizing that strong historic traditions within the agency is we started talking about a systems thinking. And basically systems thinking is that if I would draw a picture, and I've seen great examples of this, it's kind of like an iceberg. The only thing you see on that iceberg is that little thing that pops out of the ocean, but underneath is all these things that are inputting to keep that iceberg moving, or hopefully, and it's in constant flux, but you never see it. And so by seeing that systems thinking, really, we were able to identify a lot of those traditional or historic challenges. And because we weren't talking about what we saw, we were talking about the things that influence what we saw. And it allowed us not to make things personal. Because again, most people had started from their first day on through, even in our senior administrators, and we needed to find a way not to make change personal. The systems thinking was kind of what helped us identify a lot of those challenges.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And I think your point about, not forgetting your historic roots or your groups as you expand to, reaching out to new groups is an important thing to remember. Those historic groups are important too. So I was hoping from here you could speak a little bit to the process that your agency went through working with your partners on this new project that you've done over the last few years. And I know that it was sort of a multi-phase project. If you could walk us through that.
Absolutely. So the first step we did was to prepare the staff. And so we partnered with a team that Resolve Conservation, and they came in and we focused in on having a consultant come in to talk to them. And when I mean them, it was our middle management. We recognized pretty quickly that I believe that middle managers are the ones that hold the most risk for change. It's really easy for us at an upper level to say, declare a change and, everybody should be following. But with middle managers, they are typically, in for the long haul. Sometimes there's a feeling like, if I don't like a change, I just have to outlive you in the agency, and then I can go back to doing what I'm doing. And so we felt it was important to first prepare the middle management team for some change. So we brought in Resolve Conservation. They did a lot of discussions about engagement and relationships. And so from there, we heard some themes, and that allowed us in the senior team to make some decisions that we needed more help. And that's where we brought in, WMI through Ann and Chris Smith, and then Sydney with, coming in and with her, the team that she brought in with Tom Decker and Mark Duda. And so the first step was this team came in, they sat down with us and they listened. They asked a lot of questions, and we were doing things like, just the first item was talking about, were we ready as a team to really step through some of these hurdles? And so they gave us a great survey that was very useful as a readiness survey. I think we kind of outlined where we wanted to go together. And then from that, we took our strat plan, our strategic plan, and we kind of went word for word. Words matter. And that was important to us to take a critical look at the language we're using to invite people into our agency, which is a strategic plan, and how were we communicating with them. And from there, Sydney was able to develop kind of a questionnaire that here's a kind of the engagement questions we were going to ask people that were not typically traditionally had those relationships with us. And the reason we were doing that was we were going to develop a survey, a public attitude survey. And it was important to ask what questions, what did we want to know? And what viewpoints were we missing? And so Sydney was able to do all these great interviews with groups that that wanted to engage us, but we didn't even recognize there was that opportunity. And so it really allowed, by Cindy doing it, it allowed some distance between groups and the agency. And I think we got some sometimes a little bit of brutal feedback, but that's what we needed to hear. And from there, we developed a survey, and we were interested in what Ohioans thought of the Division of Wildlife. We thought we were really interested in what they wanted to participate in, what type of participation in the outdoors. And then we kind of threw in a little bit of a unique thing, which here in Ohio, we have Governor DeWine had a initiative to clean Lake Erie up. Years ago, the lake had experienced environmental pollution to the point that the city of Toledo's water system was shut down based upon the pollutants in Lake Erie. And so there was an initiative to provide cleaning the lake through wetlands to remove a lot of the harmful nutrients that are going into the system. And the Division of Wildlife benefited because we've been putting $90 million worth of wetlands in the last several years. So we took advantage of the survey to also find out what Ohioans thought of clean water, what they thought of wetlands. And so we did the survey, we got some really great data back, and then we followed up with a with a workshop with our senior team. And from the workshop, which was going over the survey, which identified really two groups that we wanted to really engage, which was young adults and Black Ohioans. And so then we came up with a plan to meet those things. What we learned from the survey, then we had a plan from after we identified the gaps in what we're missing in relationship building. And then we came up with that idea, that document, which is how do we engage?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And just kind of as a follow-up, could you share with us some of sort of the key findings that stick out to you from your agency interviews and your citizen surveys, and especially some, if there's anything that was surprising to you that you learned from this work?
The surprising thing is that we are very popular with the public, which is sometimes I think we forget that, we hear all the times about maybe sometimes that we suck, right? And so it's nice to have a survey where we're asking some tough questions. We are really based on science. And so we don't do, wildlife conservation without a science data to help us make those decisions. And so with relevancy, we needed some data. And so some of the things on the survey that we found that were really great news, that an overwhelming amount of Ohioans participated in the outdoors. We asked some opinions on what are barriers for increased participation, and we were able to identify. They wanted to feel safe, they want to feel welcomed, and they want to have access to wild places. These are all things in our agency, in our toolbox that our staff has to meet those demands. We found out that Black Ohioans knew the least about the Ohio Division of Wildlife, yet they were associated with the highest response for wanting to know more. So, it challenged some assumptions, right? That even though they don't know us yet as a group, there is a strong want to know more about us. So it was very good for the staff to see that, right? And the science shows that that's that opportunity. They have a huge amount of trust. 81% of Ohioans trust the Ohio Division of Wildlife. And so it tells us that they want to expand our relationships and partnerships also. The H2 Ohio program demonstrates how important the message of clean water is to wildlife conservation. And that's something that, maybe we don't talk about enough as a wildlife agency.
Thank you for speaking to kind of the importance of, social science, human dimensions data as part of this work, in addition to your scientific data. And would there be anything that sticks out to you from the internal agency interviews that you would want to share?
It was a strong desire to have true engagement, spend time with people. These groups wanted to see us at events. They want to work with us on shared missions. And it spoke to what we do really well. The reason that we have strong relationships with NWTFs or Ducks Unlimited is because we've spent years of time together on shared vision. And so there's a strong desire to connect with us. And it's authentic relationships take time. And that is the message that we heard. And so the next step will be, how do we fit that within, how do we spend time together? How do we listen and find what's important in the common ground that is there?
Thank you. Awesome. I know you spoke briefly a little bit there about, sort of creating a plan of action that came after these surveys. And I know you all developed a relevancy plan as well for the division. So could you speak a little bit about the process of creating those plans?
Yeah. Yes. So one item that we identified within the relevancy roadmap was, how do we hire people? Hiring was the number one item that the senior team identified as in that systems thinking. And what I mean by that is we did a critical look at who gets hired, why does that person get hired, and does it allow opportunity for all Ohioans to be successful in that hiring model. And it was funny. We started talking about our shared experience of most people. They start out with an internship, and we started taking, okay, who gets our internships? And then it was like this shared vision. Well, you'd be from a large university and you would be in wildlife management. And then we started asking ourselves, was that the best way for us to have all the voices in the room for us to make decision making? And from there, we after our discussions, our plan was this. We took every interview that we ever had, which most of us are pack rats. They had drawers full of successful interviews. This interview here produced my best biologist. This interview here produced my best wildlife officer out there. And we recognized that, but we also said we're going to throw out every old interview that we have. We, instead of hiring right away, about 4 years ago, we held jobs back, where the easiest thing for an agency to do is just to backfill a position. And we decided we were not going to backfill jobs, that we were going to have a critical time thinking about where does this job fit for the future. And what that led to was kind of a challenge to reorganize the sections to position us for the future. But we moved all our interviews to behavioral based. There is definitely some technical questions. The interviews, it's funny, just to share a quick story. It was like, well, we do ask behavioral based questions, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. And the question would be, they give a scenario of somebody on an electroshocking boat that had a problem, and how do they deal with the problem? And our answer keys were not how somebody handles a problem, not how somebody handles conflict, not how somebody builds relationships. The answers were how we have traditionally handled a problem, how we have traditionally done a relationship building. And so just by changing that, and we diversified our interview panels, changed the interviews. And the first thing we focused in on is increasing our female candidate pool, increasing our female representation within our leadership team, and also in jobs. We were about 12% females within the Division of Wildlife. Unacceptable. In the last 66 positions that we have hired since November of 2020, 21 or 33% of them have been females. And of those jobs, 7 were administrator jobs or programmatic responsibility. So in a quick time, by changing the interviews, changing how we approach things, we're on a better path for a better reflection of diversity of thought. And so that is probably the best plan that we could have for anything going forward, is to first focus in on who we are, and that's reflected Who do people see when they walk in the door of who works here?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, that touches on a lot of things from the roadmap in terms of agency culture. And I think a lot of folks that I see on the community are interested in those hiring practices and how to make spaces welcome and get a diversity, of backgrounds and interests and perspectives within the agency. And I've told Peter this before, but as a young person and a woman, it's great to hear that agencies are thinking about these types of things for the next generation of folks working in wildlife agencies. And so you kind of touched on the agency side of it, but I was wondering if you could speak as well to some of the constituent related items that Ohio will be working on going forward, maybe specifically in terms of reaching out to Black citizens and young adults.
Uh, yeah, so from some of that data, we recognize that there's a lot of work to be had. So where do we start out with? One example is in greater Cleveland area, highly urban center. We worked with the local Hispanic coalition to take an abandoned lot and turn it into a pollinator habitat. And it was great. Our staff, one of the officers up there decided that he was going to do that and brought along his several officers and said, we're going to figure this thing out. And next thing I know, I'm hearing these great stories of a mural being painted next to the garden, a signage to celebrate the idea of a migration corridor from Ohio down to Mexico, a cultural significance of the monarch butterfly, how important migrating corridors are. And that was just by the staff saying, okay, you want us to develop relationships, and us letting people take chances and providing the protection to take a chance on something we'd never have done. Giving a little bit of money and saying, here's some funding, do whatever you need with it, try some things different. And they didn't have to come to us and say, hey, can I spend a couple $100 on this? Or can I spend, it wasn't asking, it was empowering. And all your agencies, you have great communicators about wildlife conservation. That's the passion that I like to talk about. That's the passion that, when people are doing things and letting them be empowered to develop relationships, because that's authentic. Those are authentic relationships. I went out to visit that, and everybody was coming outside their house when they saw the trucks pull up with the Division of Wildlife logo, and they all knew Scott's first name. And it was amazing to me. And it was so simple, but it was something that we never thought of until we challenged the staff to develop relationships.
That's an awesome project. And Cindy Jacobson commented that that's a great example of sort of an urban, wildlife conservation, communications and outreach. And I think it's great to talk about, empowering your staff, really, excellent people with communication skills and passion for this, to share that out to people in the community. So thank you for sharing that. I just, as some of my last things here before kind of opening it up to the group, just wanted to ask sort of what are some key lessons that you and the agency have learned from sort of going through this process with the partners to be implementing the roadmap. And, for the folks here who are from other agencies or organizations who want to be, doing similar work, what kind of advice or recommendations would you give them?
Yeah. Thank you. Systems thinking is really important. It allowed things not to be personal. So I would encourage getting some consulting work with, somebody to explain, to your staff or to your leadership team, the importance of systems thinking. And from there, you can develop pacing. Pacing of change is really important to an agency that's been around for 150 years. We start out small, start with, your hiring practices, build upon that. And the other thing I think we really learned is that there will be pushback. There will be internal pushback. I guess maybe anything you can do to have the staff learn to be a little uncomfortable, maybe they become more comfortable being uncomfortable, is really important. But you have to pace out that change. Most state agencies, they have a long history, a very proud tradition. Employees believe in what they're doing, that they're doing the right thing for future generations, and you just need to build on it. I think when we talk about relevancy, it just means we are going to expand what we do well. We're going to put things on the ground that people can see. This isn't some theoretical exercise. This is about relationships and smiling faces and being able to talk to people about the wonderful work, conservation work that we do, which will result in clean water, great wildlife populations, and kind of protecting the way of life, where you have the opportunity to participate in many different ways of outdoor wildlife recreation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that communicating, why the agency and its work matters to people is something super important. And, the work that these agencies have been doing over generations, really, to support their constituencies.
It helped having several NCLI grads on the senior team. So when conversations started to get heated, there was understanding why and how we navigate through that to make a better decision. That really did benefit us also.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned earlier, remembering that it's not personal, it's not about, individuals, it's about the broader agency and the way that it operates when you're thinking about these things. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wanted to add here, sort of before we open it up, about this process you've been going through for the last few years?
I just can't say enough about the team from WMI, Cindy Jacobson, outstanding. Mark Duda from Responsive Management with David Purcell. I mean, just the survey went so smooth. They helped us get through this. Dr. Maria Palmer from Resolve, she was great. She was really the first one to get our staff a little bit starting to talk about these things. And it was absolutely worth every dime that we spent. This is an investment in staff. This is an investment for the future. I can't speak enough to the consultants that we had that really we look as partners, and they were genuinely interested in our success in this realm.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing all the work that you all are doing. And I think really, providing an example for other agencies who are going to hear about this, who are, looking to get involved in relevancy, just beginning it. So this is so great. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Well, I do want to open it up to anyone who would like to unmute or put a question in the chat to ask anything here to Peter. And maybe we do have Ann and Cindy from some of the partner organizations here. Ann and Cindy, if you guys wanted to comment at all as well about, how you all have been supporting Ohio, working on the relevancy roadmap, that would be great. Looks like Amanda is here. Do you have a question, Amanda?
I do have a question. And first and foremost, thank you for all taking the time to explain Ohio's process. I work at ODFW, or Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, rather. Everyone leads with alphabet soup, so sorry. As someone that at my agency is actively involved in trying to unpack a lot of the relevancy mapping and apply it to the work that we do at ODFW, one of the things that's become very clear to us is that relevancy for us is focusing a lot on the things that we aren't necessarily doing so well, as in the areas where we're lacking relevancy, where we're lacking the opportunity to engage because we're not even participating in conversations with many different groups of individuals. So I guess my question for consideration would be, what are the things that Ohio is doing to address those pitfalls, as all agencies have them? So as someone that's trying to learn from and not necessarily reinvent the wheel or cross-apply other learnings, can you share with me some of the things that Ohio is doing right now to address those pitfalls and or identify the gaps in relevancy that the agency is currently experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there is absolutely gaps, right? I mean, I think it's a recognition that there is a lot of work to be had. And I think, to go to a previous point about pacing, I think it was important for us to pick one or two of the spots that we identified. Okay, here's something we could build upon within the relevancy roadmap. Figure out, for whatever agency you're with, something small that you can really influence right away to build upon. Absolutely, you're right, Mina. There is a lot of work to be had with all these. We're not part of conversations within a lot of communities, so we have to figure out a way to develop those authentic relationships. And I wish I had the magic bullet, so to speak. I know to say, hey, this one thing's going to work, and we're going to be okay. I guess I view the relevancy roadmap as kind of a never-ending process. And as we're stepping through this, but you got to start somewhere. And that was what our approach was. We have to influence some change, and it has to be noticeable to our staff.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the question, Amanda. I've got a question here, another question for you coming in from the chat from Bobby Jones from Nevada, I believe. He asked, in relation to the Pathways project itself, if you were able to go back, knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently?
During this whole change, we were also experiencing COVID. That really added a whole different level of anxiety for staff and uncertainty. I worried if this was too much, as we were influencing change. And I know this has nothing to do, but this is life, right? And so they were experiencing this idea of change, and then on top of that, our world changed in a very dramatic way. And so that's pacing. I think I would have liked to, if I know now, the plan was right. It was the right time. We were ripe for change. We had a new leadership team in, and we had support from our senior team to move forward with institutional change. So I don't know if there would have been a whole lot other than we had to roll with some punches on causing a lot of anxiety with the staff and contributing to that. And I'm very proud to say that, we're still working on this. This is just one more step. Every day is just one more step to our goal.
Thank you for that. And I've been talking to some folks from different states over the last 2 years, and a lot of people mention those challenges from COVID over these last 2 years, and dealing with that as they begin to implement their roadmap projects. So it's great to see the perseverance through that as we continue on. Got another question from Megan Manfredi. I believe she's also from Nevada. She's asking, what steps did the agency take to help recruit applicants for positions as far as people who are outside the traditional type of candidate?
Great question. So one way was changing some of our minimum qualifications as far as the very specific academic field. We have made a shift to provide opportunity for people that candidates that didn't have just a straight fish and wildlife degree. And that helped a lot when we started seeing some, people involved with landscape biology and ecology and environmental science. That really increased our applicant pool. On a recent wildlife officer hiring process, we had more better reflection. The most female candidates we've ever had the opportunity to participate in that hiring process. We really focused in on opportunity instead of outcome. We really strongly talk all the time about opportunity for somebody to be successful on a process, a hiring process, and not focusing in on, what is the end result? Because we believe that the end results are naturally going to happen as we build capacity, as people that look different than me see themselves in our staff. That'll be the biggest recruiting tool that we'll have.
Thank you, Peter, for mentioning, the qualifications for folks and opening it up to folks from different degrees. We've got another question here, I think, for you, Peter, and also for Anne, as well, is going to speak to this. Kevin Bixby wants us to talk a little bit about sort of the challenge of balancing supportive, sort of traditional consumptive hunting, trapping, fishing types of users versus more of a view of protecting all species and ecosystems. Animals aren't just there for human consumption. So how do you, balance reaching out to those new groups while also not being perceived as, leaving behind the old constituents or even being anti-hunting? Anne, do you want to kick it off there?
Sure. Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks, Kevin, for the question. From the team that wrote the roadmap, we did recognize that we were focusing really the roadmap on new constituencies. That was not in any way intended to pivot agencies away from traditional audiences. It was really just a recognition of agencies' needs to reach out to new constituencies, and not just to be relevant, but to have those new broader constituents value and support conservation, even if they don't participate in outdoor recreation activities. So, I think we get wrapped up in the word relevancy and forget that it's about helping people understand the benefits that they get from conservation, and then also the different ways that they value conservation, and all the ways, as Lindsay pointed out earlier, all the ways that these new constituencies can support conservation, and that helps support the provision of the benefits to the traditional constituencies.
Yeah, right now, so it's
Yeah. Peter, did you want to speak to that at all from the perspective of Ohio or the process you all went through?
So that is a strong staff fear. There's no doubt about it. I think there's a strong, this is an internal fear of we're going to abandon, abandon all these great relationships. And what I like to share with staff is we're just expanding on what we've always done. As a fish and wildlife agency, we could have both. We could be a hunting and fishing agency while also being a wildlife agency. And I think there's a balance there. And we could be a wildlife agency that supports hunting and fishing. And we could be a wildlife agency that supports hunting and fishing and endangered species work and species of concern and monarch butterflies. We can do that. It's in our wheelhouse. I think we're so attuned to this fear of losing this identity. And a lot of it is because of that strong tradition that we all have, that agency-wise, at least state agencies, with the idea that I know when people walk into my building, they're probably seeing things like on the back of the wall, something dead on the wall, right? So that's one way the system kind of reinforces this idea that, you know, this agency was, at least in Ohio, that strong hunting tradition and anglers and hunters, they're always going to be important to us. But I think we as the staff feel at times that we have to pick, and we don't.
Hey, Lindsay, this is Cindy Jacobson, and I just wanted to speak to Sarah's question about how we worked with these population segments of interest, these groups, and also maybe ask responsive management to speak to the survey itself. But basically, Sarah, so Ohio was an important ingredient to this was Ohio's executive planning group. You know, very interested in engaging these new population segments of interest. So a part of one of the ingredients to this, one of the key ingredients is really the willingness to kind of accept some of the risk that's involved in making these connections with these new groups that may or may not know much about Ohio DOW. And they did that through these interviews. And so that was one way of connecting with these groups. Doing these qualitative interviews. And, you know, a lot of that was really just basically cold calling, if you will, and just saying, hey, you know, Ohio DOW is really interested in, you know, what you think and what you're interested in and what are the barriers to participation, as Peter mentioned in his presentation. And so that was one way to really engage with some of these groups, just to get a pulse check of where they were and what they were thinking. And it was really very valuable, rich information that, you know, DOW is now taking to the next level. Like, how do they continue that relationship building with those groups and even more groups? You know, an example of that is through their state wildlife action plan revision process. There's a great opportunity to connect with a broader constituency, you know, not only the groups that they had engaged with before, which are very important to that process, but also new groups. And so really exciting opportunities that all of you guys maybe have to, you know, make those connections using the state wildlife action plan as, you know, a conversation starter, if you will. So I don't know if Dave or somebody from responsive management wants to just talk about a little bit about how, you know, the survey and engaging folks through collecting that type of information.
Yeah, sure. This is David Parcell. Thanks, Cindy. From the quantitative survey standpoint, we did a number of things to try and ensure that we got a representative sample for the quantitative surveys. One, we start with selecting survey sample through survey sample suppliers, traditional research suppliers, and we're collecting both online and telephone survey sample that is representative of the populations we're looking for. And there were several populations within the state of Ohio. We wanted a statewide general population. And if I recall correctly, we targeted some specific populations within specific geographic areas, metropolitan areas. We were looking for underserved populations, inner city folks, some of the ethnic populations that we were trying to reach. So that's first. We start with the sample that we select. Second is we do a multimodal approach, meaning we essentially try whatever we have to try in order to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to participate in the survey. In Ohio, I believe it was primarily telephone and online, a combination of the two. Online is faster and less expensive, but we incorporate random digit dialing telephone just to make sure that, again, we reach those populations that you typically can't reach through other online surveys. And then the final piece of this, and Peter and Cindy can probably comment on this, is that we try and minimize the burden on the survey respondent. So what that means is we try and go in with a survey that's 12 to 15 minutes long, no longer than that. There's always a challenge there because there's a ton of information that we're interested in. And we spent a lot of time in some of the early phases of this research program were to identify the topical areas for the survey. But then there's only so many questions we can ask in a 12-minute survey or a 15-minute survey. So that's always a bit of a balancing act to try and not overburden their survey respondents. So we give them a good experience. They're able to get on the phone with us or go online and take our survey and be done with it relatively quickly. So those are kind of three of the things that we typically design into every survey that we do to ensure that we're reaching the population that we're targeting.
Thank you both for providing some info on that, sort of the X's and O's of the survey. And I think that working with these partners who have the added capacity and expertise is excellent. And people are concerned, how do we even get the data and information of people who aren't, in our hunting license database, for example, to actually reach out to new groups. So thank you so much for giving us some info on that. Sort of on a related question, we've got a couple more here in our chat box. This one's from Amanda, again from Oregon. She wanted to know, Peter, what Ohio is doing to engage some trusted communicators to sort of take on the task of reaching out to these new groups, especially considering, you have such a diverse and vast audience that you're trying to reach out to beyond, just the few target groups. So what are some strategies for communicating with folks?
Wow, it's a great question. And what I'm hearing is, how did we develop a trusted communications plan for this engagement? We relied on we have a great team that kind of comprises our marketing and communication side. So we call that our customer engagement team. And so they have been a strong advocate for relevancy work, and we have allowed them to come up with, we are working with them for them to get the messaging out, to help our staff understand what's important. I think authentic relationships maybe don't really come from my level. It comes from the people that we have embedded in the local communities. And, we have wildlife personnel throughout in each county and every part of the state. And so having having some critical thinking about what is the messaging, how does that reflect in today's society? We had those discussions, and we've had a lot of input from this customer engagement team that's doing a wonderful job.
Thank you for speaking to that. And I think you mentioned, this capacity is already part of your agency. There's professionals that, do communications, marketing, and it's just, getting to them to think about this new type of engagement to get involved in. So I've got one final question, and I think it can be sort of an overarching question here. It's from Camila Caceres. Not sure which agency she's from, but she made the question comment. Peter, hopefully you can speak to this a bit on your expertise on how you got going with relevancy, sort of. So with limited time and budget and capacity within agencies to take on new projects, how can these folks go about convincing their agency leadership that DEI efforts or other relevancy projects are worth the effort? And how can you make these relevancy issues sort of, rise to the top over other budget items or even, emergency funding needs?
Yeah, great question. Our strategy was to find some small projects the budgets that we gave each of these projects was, I think, totaled under like $40,000. I mean, into a $90 million agency that it was easy to find that type of money. And they're very small. I mean, but what I mean by that, very small investment. but to the staff that saw the difference, or to the community, what we put the pollinator garden on, it was such a great example. And we called them pilot programs. For whatever reason in government, you call it a pilot program, and it gives some flexibility that's not so rigid. Or where do we have a plan for this? Or where do we have, staffing for it? We called it a pilot project, empowered some of the staff to do something small. And then we elevated the communication when these things are done. We shared it with all the staff. We shared it with on our social media. We shared it with the governor's office. Very small projects that you see a bunch of smiling faces, and it's real easy to get behind, because what our developing relationships is in our toolbox. That's how wildlife conservation has always been done and will always continue to be done. And we're just empowering a very small investment by allowing our staff to be empowered to take a chance.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for just speaking to, the capacity that you all already have, and that it doesn't have to be, agency altering, budget investment to make differences that, that can have impact on individual people who are going to, give their support to the agency and make a difference in conservation there. And I think, for all the folks listening to this, just to hear some of these, first steps or small steps that do have a positive impact, I think that can be, inspiring and motivating to folks. And these success stories can help, bring about those larger conversations in agencies with leadership about focusing on relevancy. So thank you. And I believe, unless anyone else wants to chime in with any other questions, that's all I had. And just want to say thank you so much to Peter for, sharing materials from this project with the folks on the community, sharing his time here today to answer my questions and all of your questions, and for continuing this work and really providing an example to folks who I think are looking to learn.
Well, Lindsay, thank you for not asking too tough of a question. You've been a great facilitator on that and on this project. And I'm very flattered to see so many people online hearing about, what I view relevancy is it's not that big of a step. You just start somewhere and build upon what we do well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks to all for tuning in today. And this recording will be available on our website later today. So I would encourage folks to share it to others that they work with if they missed it here today. Thanks, everyone, again.